They say the dead rest quietly. Whoever they are, they've never been to my world. Death is our eternal harvest here, and the dead far outnumber the living. I should know. I'm one of the few living souls tending to them. My name is Marcus Amnar, and I'm a gravekeeper on the cemetery world of Tenebris. In the Imperium of man, worlds like mine are where heroes and common folk alike come to rest. Tenebris, a planet-sized graveyard, blanketed with tombs, mausoleums, and endless fields of bones. It wasn't always so. Millennia ago, Tenebris was an ordinary frontier world until a great war's aftermath turned it into a memorial. Sector histories recall that in the mid-39th millennium, following the bloody siege of Caligurn, as Tenebris was then called, so many Imperial soldiers lay dead that the Adeptus Ministorum consecrated the entire planet as hallowed ground to inter them. Over the centuries, noble families and war heroes from across the sector chose to be buried here among those honored dead. By my grandparents' time, Tenebris was formally classified a cemetery world, its sole purpose to safeguard the fallen. We've been tending the dead ever since. I've lived my whole life among monuments of the fallen. Every day I wake under the shadow of soaring mausoleum spires and endless rows of headstones stretching beyond the horizon. The air always carries the scent of dust, incense, and old decay. Some might find that morbid. I call it mourning. On a cemetery world, silence is the loudest sound. It's a silence heavy with remembrance, and sometimes secrets. They say it's quiet among the dead, but on Tenebris, the quiet has a way of playing tricks on you. Spend enough time in the grave fields, and you start hearing whispers in rustling leaves, footsteps in the fog that belong to no one. At least, no one still living. I speak from experience. I've dug graves at midnight and felt unseen eyes watching. I've walked the misty colonnades of the great ossuaries where the slightest echo can raise the hair on your neck. It's as if the dead are not quite done talking. Maybe that's just my mind coping with the endless stillness. Or maybe this world truly is haunted by more than memories. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me start at the beginning. An introduction to life, if you can call it that, on a world dedicated entirely to death. This is my home, the graveyard of an entire sector, and this is my story of living among the dead. The silent city of the dead. I grew up in the shadow of Obsidia, the capital city of Tenebris, though city is a generous term. Obsidia is less a living metropolis and more a vast necropolis, a cathedral city of the dead. Nearly every structure is a tomb, a shrine, or a monument. By day, sunlight struggles through stained glass windows of towering mausoleums, painting the cobbled streets in blood red and gold hues. By night, the skyline is a forest of black spires and steeples, silhouetted against a starless sky, each crowned with dim halo lamps that flicker like ghost light. Obsidia's streets wind like labyrinthine funerary processions. Narrow alleyways snake between colossal crypts carved with names of heroes and saints long gone. The largest of all is the Grand Mausoleum at the city's heart, a palace of eternal rest for imperial dignitaries. Its domed roof looms over everything, inscribed with 1,000,000 names of the fallen. Candles burn in their thousands across its buttresses and balconies. From a distance, it's as if the building itself is aflame with souls. With each passing day, the mausoleum sees rites and ceremonies. Once each year, on the Feast of the Sanctification, the planetary governor, known as the Lord of the Wake, emerges to lead a great procession around this grand mausoleum. Governor Geronius Pyre seldom appears in public, but when he does, it's a sight out of legend. An ancient, withered man draped in embroidered funeral shrouds, riding in an ornate black carriage drawn by sable horses. His retinue of vestals, priests dedicated to perpetual mourning, accompanies him on foot, each adorned with skeletal motifs and continuously weeping as they walk. Their eyes are permanently bloodshot from the ritual tears they shed day and night. To them, mourning is both duty and worship. By lantern light, they circle the mausoleum, chanting laments for all who died that year. It's a haunting spectacle, the wails of the vestals echoing off stone, Governor Pyre raising a trembling hand in blessing over the graves. Pilgrims gather in hushed silence to witness this ritual of grief, though few outsiders are permitted too close. Even we caretakers watch from a distance, hearts heavy and humbled by the display. For the living residents, priests, caretakers, gravediggers like me, home is in the margins of all this grandeur. We dwell in modest quarters tucked behind chapel walls or in the lower levels of ossuaries. My own bunk is in a dormitory beneath the chapel of St. Evans, amidst the catacombs that hold that saint's lesser relics. It's a humble existence. The dead are housed far better than we are. But we don't complain. It's an honor, we tell ourselves, to live and serve here. To tend the Emperor's chosen resting ground is a sacred duty. Walking through Obsidia, you'll see more memorial processions than markets. There's no bustling commerce like on a hive world. Our chief import is corpses, and our exports are prayers. Pilgrims arrive with caskets and leave with nothing but memories. Down by the spaceport, little more than a landing field of slate amidst gargantuan statues, cargo landers offload the dearly departed from war zones or distant planets. I remember the thunderous hiss when the holds open, the air heavy with incense to mask the stench of death. Our crews, clad in gray robes and rebreather masks, unload coffin after coffin in solemn silence. Each coffin is draped in the Imperial flag, bearing the aquila if the deceased served the Emperor in life. Those who died less gloriously travel more plainly, but here all are equal in the end. We catalog and transport the bodies to their designated resting places. Nobles and war heroes claim spots in the ornate vaults of Obsidia's upper levels. It can be a labyrinth just to locate the correct alcove for each sarcophagus. Meanwhile, common soldiers and civilians often go to the vast fields outside the city, endless rows of simple graves or communal ossuaries, depending on their family's means. I've dug graves out there under every sky, blazing sun, drizzling rain, even under the weird green auroras that sometimes dance above our atmosphere. At night, when fog rolls in from the moors, those grave fields look like an ocean of ghosts, pale grave markers jutting from the mist, seeming to float. You learn quickly not to let your imagination run wild out there. In Obsidia itself, the population of the living is sparse. The dead far outnumber the living is practically the planet's motto. Perhaps a few 100,000 breathing souls tend to billions of deceased. We often pass entire days without speaking a word aloud because there's no bustling crowd, no everyday hustle. Only funeral chants carried by choirs in the basilica or the toll of distant bells marking another interment. It's a quiet life, outwardly at least, but beneath that quiet, Tenebris is alive in its own eerie way. The architecture creaks and groans with age. Wind whistles through ironwork and bone ornamentation. The great forests beyond Obsidia whisper as if with the voices of the dead. Yes, forests. Not everything here is stone and ash. Tenebris has patches of dense woodland nourished by millennia of burials. Gnarled trees with roots tangled around sunken tombstones line some of the older grave sites. Their leaves grow a dark green so deep it looks black, and they say the wood remembers the dead. Locals call them grave oaks or mourning trees. I swear sometimes when I pass under their boughs, I feel a chill even on a warm day. Our world's beauty is a morbid one. There is a certain somber splendor to the sight of morning light breaking over fields of alabaster headstones, or the sound of 100 monks singing a requiem in the grand mausoleum's halls. It can move one to tears, even someone like me who handles death daily. We take pride in keeping it dignified. Every statue is kept free of moss, well, as free as the endless damp allows. Every inscription is gilded so names won't fade. We tidy flowers left by mourners, reposition fallen censer burners that waft holy incense through the graveyards. It's painstaking work, but these small acts feel significant when death is all around. Amid all this deathly pomp, a visitor might ask, "Where is life?" Life continues quietly on Tenebris, just overshadowed by the dead. We have our small gatherings after work, a humble meal of corpse starch bread and maybe some amasec, if rations allow. We share stories, mostly about things we've seen in the crypts or humorous epitaphs on tombs. We maintain a little market once a week by the spaceport for supplies, candles, shovels, maintenance parts, simple foodstuffs imported from an agri-world. Currency here isn't thrones like elsewhere. We trade in bone chips. Yes, actual coins carved from bone, the polished fragments of femurs or rib bones, scrimshawed with the imperial sigil. The idea is that those who are buried contribute a piece of themselves to support the living. Morbid, absolutely. But on a cemetery world, even money has to remind you of mortality. Crime on Tenebris is almost non-existent. There's little to steal except bones and sacred relics, and one would have to be either desperate or mad to incur the wrath of the ecclesiarchy by taking those. Yet the threat of tomb robbers and off-world relic smugglers is a constant undercurrent of fear. The bones of saints or legendary heroes are priceless to the faithful and thus tragically valuable to heretics and collectors beyond our world. Our security details and the Adeptus Arbites keep watch for any such desecrators. Lord Pyre himself is obsessed with preventing relic theft. I've heard he once ordered a smuggler flayed for pocketing a martyr's fingerbone. Rumors even claim he's enlisted a mysterious ally, some say an outcast Eldar ranger, to help track down relic thieves, though that sounds like tavern gossip to me. Regardless, we caretakers remain vigilant. It is an ironic twist that on a planet full of the dead, it's the living thieves we guard against most zealously. My earliest memory is of holding a candle in a vigil for some lord's funeral, my small hands shaking as I tried not to drip wax on the marble floor. I was barely 6 years old, apprenticed to an old caretaker named Garan. He'd rap me on the shoulder if I slouched or faltered in reciting the litany of rest. At the time, I was frightened by the corpses and the dark crypts. But Garan would say, "No need to fear the dead, boy. It's the living you must watch closely." He was right about that, though I didn't understand it fully then. Thus, Tenebris became my world, literally and spiritually. Over the years, I learned every cobbled lane of Obsidia, every shortcut through the catacomb tunnels connecting the ossuaries. I've stood by countless burials, murmuring prayers with the clerics, while family members wept or stared stony-faced. I've chiseled names into headstones with my own hands, carefully so as not to err. A misspelled name is a grave sin here. Pardon the pun, as Garan used to say. Through it all, I developed a bit of a gallows humor. You have to, really, to stay sane. When you're ankle-deep in bones repairing an old crypt door, joking about how someone lost their head, is how you cope. My fellow workers and I share a cynical chuckle at the overly flowery epitaphs or the absurdity of some noble's gigantic tomb that only contains a single finger bone because the rest of him was vaporized in war. We laugh, then feel a tad guilty and say a quick prayer for forgiveness. The Emperor probably understands. After all, we honor the dead in our deeds even if we jest about them in private. So that's our city and our life in broad strokes. Quiet, reverent, a touch macabre, occasionally lonely, occasionally darkly comic. A routine of maintenance, prayer, and waiting for the next ship to bring another load of the Imperial fallen. It's a strange existence, but it is ours. And for a while, that was all there was to it. Tending graves, remembering the dead, living one day to the next in the Emperor's shadow. Living constantly among tombs and echoes inevitably turns one's mind to deeper matters. As I shovel earth onto coffins or polish memorial plaques by lantern light, I often find myself contemplating the nature of death and duty. In the wider Imperium, death usually comes suddenly. On a battlefield, in the void of space, in the jaws of some alien horror, often leaving little time for reflection or ritual. But on Tenebris, death is slow, orderly, and omnipresent. Here, every passing is catalogued, every corpse given a place. We caretakers have the luxury or curse of witnessing the final repose of countless souls and reflecting on what it means. Some might assume this breeds despair or morbid obsession. For a few, perhaps it does. I've seen novices freeze at their first mass burial, overwhelmed by the sheer scale of loss laid out before them. I've seen older gravediggers become numb, treating bodies like nothing more than parcels to be sorted, an understandable emotional defense. But more often, I find that living on a cemetery world instills a profound sense of purpose. Each grave we dig is an act of respect. Each name etched is a vow that someone will remember. In a galaxy consumed by war, that is no small thing. Personally, I've come to view death not as an enemy, but as a final duty to be managed. We cannot escape it. No one in the Imperium does, not even the God Emperor who sits immortal on the golden throne, in a manner of speaking. But we can choose how we face it. On Tenebris, we face it head-on every day. We prepare for our own deaths in the way we care for others. It might sound strange, but there's a comfort in that routine. I know that when my time comes, the rituals I have performed for others will be performed for me in turn. My body will lie in state in one of these cold halls, incense burning and hymns chanting, and a younger caretaker will gently lower my casket into the ground, dust to dust, in the Emperor's grace. The thought doesn't frighten me anymore. If anything, it motivates me to live rightly so that I earn the peace I work so hard to provide for others. That's not to say I never feel fear or sorrow. I do. Often intensely. I grieve with the widows and orphans who come here to mourn. I've shed tears in private when a child's tiny coffin passes through my hands, or when I bury an old friend with whom I used to share evening prayers. Each death is a weight on my soul, but my faith teaches that the Emperor knows and values every one of his servants, even in death. I take solace believing that these fallen are with him now, beyond pain and strife, and it strengthens my resolve that as long as I draw breath, I will continue to honor them and ease the burden of those left behind. In a way, caring for the dead is how we care for the living. When a fresh batch of bodies arrives from some distant war, we're not just disposing of corpses, we're giving closure to the comrades and families who could not be here. We're ensuring that sacrifice is acknowledged under the eyes of eternity. That matters in the Imperium, where so many die nameless and unremembered on forgotten battlefields. Here at least their name is carved in stone, and their memory given a prayer. Sometimes I run my fingers over a century-old headstone and wonder about the person beneath, what battles they fought, what love or hope they carried, what their last thoughts were. In that moment, in some small way, they live again in my mind. Maybe that's fanciful, but it comforts me. So yes, life on a cemetery world is steeped in death. But it's not hopeless. We have our laughter, our simple pleasures, sharing a warm drink after a long day's work, swapping ghost stories that both scare and amuse us, tending the small gardens that grow amid the graves. We find meaning in our duty, and we find even joy where we can. I've seen a pair of young acolytes fall in love while tending adjacent grave plots, their whispered flirtations carried out over coffins. A bit morbid, perhaps, but who am I to judge? Humans persevere, even here. We honor the dead by living as best we can, modest and pious though our lives may be. In the end, I've come to believe that Tenebris is not a place of endings, so much as a place of continuity. The dead rest, the living remember, and through remembrance, a part of those who've gone stays with us. Each morning I step out of my quarters and see the sun gilding thousands of headstones. It reminds me that for every tragedy that brought someone here, there is also the triumph that humanity endures and rebuilds. We carry on in defiance of all the darkness. Perhaps that is the ultimate lesson of this cemetery world, that even surrounded by death, the light of human devotion and duty never truly goes out. It persists, quiet, unyielding, eternal. One particularly somber arrival not long ago stands out in memory. A Navy transport, the Merciful Angel, came in bearing the remains of an entire Imperial Guard regiment lost on Cineris 4. Thousands of flag-draped coffins stacked like cordwood in its hold. Offloading them took us days. Each coffin bore the name and rank of a soldier who would never see home again. I helped carry the standard of the 223rd Sarin Rifles off that ship, a blood-stained banner to be displayed in our Hall of Honor. As we laid those soldiers to rest in neat rows of graves under a dull morning sky, I remember finding a locket that had fallen from one of the caskets. Inside was a tiny portrait of a woman and child. I didn't know the soldier's name, but I placed that locket gently atop his coffin lid before the soil covered it, saying a silent prayer for the family who would never welcome him back. That day I truly understood the weight of this world's duty. During that process, I discovered a crumpled letter tucked into the coat of one fallen sergeant. It was never sent. Perhaps he hoped to deliver it after the war that claimed him. With a heavy heart, I read it before placing it with his effects. I still remember the words. "My dearest Livia, if you are reading this, then I have fallen in service to the Emperor. I pray you find this letter swiftly so my voice reaches you even though I cannot. Please do not grieve too deeply for me. Know that I died with our family's name on my lips and your love in my heart. I fought as an emperor-fearing man should, alongside good comrades. If I failed to return, it was not because I lacked courage, but because he willed that I serve him at his side instead. Tell little Marius his father is sorry he won't be there to see him grow into a fine man. Teach him to uphold the imperial creed, to be brave and kind as I tried to be. And you, my sweet Livia, thank you for the joy you gave me. Every moment with you was a blessing I carried into battle as my shield. I regret only that I cannot grow old with you on that porch we painted blue watching the sunrise. Do not let despair claim you. We will meet again in the Emperor's light when your days are done. Until then, live. Love our son enough for both of us. And every time you see the sun rise, think of me and know that I am at peace and watch over you both. Your devoted husband, Gaius. I remember those lines whenever I help bury someone's loved one. They remind me that every corpse we lay down had hopes, dreams, people who cared for them. It strengthens my resolve to treat each and every one with the dignity they deserve. Graveyard shifts and unseen terrors. One overcast afternoon, not long ago, I was out in the grave fields beyond Obsidia with my fellow caretaker and closest friend, Thomas. We had a routine assignment, reinterring some remains that had been moved out of a family vault. The deceased noble's lineage had finally paid for a private mausoleum, so we had to relocate their ancestors from a communal crypt to the new resting place. Glamorous work? Hardly. It was the sort of thankless, grubby task we did regularly, digging up old coffins, carrying bones, saying a brief prayer as we sealed them in a fresh tomb elsewhere. Just another day on Tenebris. The sky hung low and gray as we trundled a cart of tools and sanctified coffers across the field. Rows of simple iron crosses and stone markers spread around us, disappearing into a haze of fog. The air tasted of damp earth and lichen. Thomas walked beside me, humming an old funeral hymn under his breath. He had a habit of doing that to fill the silence. I used to tease him that he only knew dirges and nothing cheerful. He'd retort, "We live on a cemetery world, Marcus. What do you expect? Drinking songs?" We reached the old burial site by late afternoon. It was a neglected corner of the field under a cluster of twisted grave oaks. Their branches bowed low as if in mourning, moss draping them like funeral veils. We began to unearth the coffins identified on our ledger. Despite the moist air, the ground was surprisingly firm. Tomas, sturdy and methodical, did most of the heavy spade work while I read aloud the rites from a weathered pamphlet. Even exhumations require prayer here, to ask the Emperor's blessing and pardon for disturbing remains. As we labored, the fog crept thicker. Daylight faded faster than expected, casting the world in premature dusk. I lit a small lamp and set it on a headstone, its weak glow barely piercing the mist. We had recovered 2 coffins and placed them on our cart. A third, containing one Magdalene Forthus, beloved wife and mother, 780 to 832. M41, according to the corroded plaque, lay half exposed in the grave pit. "That's the last one," I grunted, wiping sweat and mud from my brow. Tomas jumped down into the pit to secure ropes around the coffin so we could haul it up. I prepared the pulley frame, shivering a little. The fog made everything clammy. As I steadied the rope, a faint rustling sounded beyond the ring of trees. I paused. It was a wet, slithering noise, like something dragging through grass. My first thought was maybe a pilgrim or local animal. We get feral groks sometimes wandering from the pasture lands. But this didn't sound like hooves. "Tomas, you hear that?" I whispered. He paused, listening. All we heard was the drip of condensation off leaves. He shrugged. Probably just the wind, or one of those wild yeggs. We continued our work. We hoisted Magdalene's coffin up to ground level with a muffled thud. The 2 of us maneuvered it onto our cart with the others. That's when the silence was broken by an unholy screech. A shrill, keening cry echoed through the mist, raising every hair on my body. It sounded almost human, but not quite, distorted in pain or fury. Tomas and I froze. "Emperor's mercy, what was that?" he hissed, eyes wide. I grabbed my lamp and swung its light around. Through the fog, at the edge of the grave clearing, I caught a glimpse of movement, something low to the ground, slinking behind a tombstone. 2 pinpoints of pale light reflected back at me, like eyes in the dark. My heart hammered. That cry had triggered a memory from training sessions long ago. Garen's voice in my head. "Beware the corpse crawlers, boy. They live in the wild graves. If you smell rot and hear skittering, Stay sharp. Corpse crawlers. Indigenous carrion beasts that burrow into coffins and feed on corpses. I had never seen one up close, but I'd seen what they left of bodies. Gnawed bones, coffins chewed through from within. "Thomas," I whispered carefully, "I think we've got a corpse crawler around." He inhaled sharply, glancing at the half-filled grave pit and our cart of coffins. "Throne of Terror! It must have caught scent when we dug these up." As if on cue, another shriek rang out, this time from the opposite side. We spun around. Now 2 pairs of faintly glowing eyes circled us in the gloom. My mouth went dry. One crawler was bad enough. They were the size of large hounds, with too many legs and a maw of hooked fangs, if the rumors held true. 2 of them, here, with dusk falling. "We should leave, now," Tomas urged, voice trembling but controlled. He was right. We'd loaded what we came for. No sense lingering. We both grabbed the handlebar of the cart and began hastily pushing it back toward the path. It jostled over rough ground, coffins rattling within. We tried to move quietly, but haste made noise. Halfway to the main path, something lunged from the mist with a wet, gurgling snarl. One of the corpse crawlers rushed us from the left flank. In the lamplight, I caught a hideous sight. Pale, hairless hide stretched over a centipede-like body as long as a man, glistening with grave slime. Its face was a lamprey-like circular maw ringed with teeth, and it dragged itself on dozens of spindly, clawed legs. It moved with alarming speed. "Look out!" I shouted. Thompson swung the shovel he still carried, and the metal head smacked into the creature's side. It let out a warbling screech and recoiled, ichor oozing from a gash in its rubbery flesh. But the second crawler was already upon us from the right. It barreled into the cart, spilling one of the coffins off with a crash. I was knocked onto my back, suddenly face to face with the thing as it reared up. Its corpse-reeking breath hit me like a wall. I fumbled for anything to defend myself. My hand met the handle of a crowbar we'd brought for opening crypts. As the crawler struck at me, I jammed the crowbar upward. Luck was with me. The iron bar lodged across the monster's gaping maw, bracing between 2 clusters of teeth. It thrashed, unable to close its jaws, emitting a muffled shriek. I scrambled back to my feet, adrenaline overriding my terror. Tomas shouted a battle prayer and leapt forward, swinging his shovel down in a brutal arc. The blade of the spade chopped into the creature's head carapace with a sickening crunch, splitting it. The crawler convulsed and collapsed, greenish fluids gushing. I pulled my crowbar free with shaking hands as the thing's twitching finally stopped. The first crawler wasn't done, though. Enraged, or maybe drawn by the scent of blood, it came at us again. I had no time to think. Tomas and I both grabbed the coffin that had fallen off our cart. With a desperate yell, we heaved the heavy box at the charging creature. The coffin, filled with the bones of some long-dead ancestor, slammed into the beast. It knocked the crawler off course, the coffin bursting open in a spray of old bones and splintered wood. The creature tumbled, entangled in the mortal remains of Magdalene Forthus. Not wasting the opportunity, Tomas seized our lantern and hurled it at the creature. The glass shattered on its back, fire from the oil inside whooshing up in a bright flare. The crawler screeched as flames licked its pallid flesh. It writhed frantically, then skittered away into the darkness, leaving a trail of acrid smoke. We could hear its anguished cries fading into the distance. For a long moment, the only sound was our own ragged breathing. I realized I was clutching a rosary around my neck that I didn't remember grabbing, the small Aquila pendant digging into my palm. My heart pounded, and I could feel the tremor in Tomas's shoulder as I gripped it to steady myself. Emperor, save us. We got one," he panted, looking at the dead crawler we'd felled first. He prodded it with the shovel to ensure it wasn't moving. It lay still, a grotesque heap of glistening flesh and segmented limbs. I exhaled a shaky laugh that was half a sob, and scared off the other. My voice was thin, trying to mask the adrenaline-fueled panic we both felt. I attempted a wry grin. See, this job has perks, free exercise, and pest control practice. Tomas managed a weak chuckle, though he was clearly rattled. Next time someone says working the graveyard shift is dull, I'll remind them of this. Our nerves gradually steadied as we reassembled our cart. We had lost a coffin to the scuffle, its occupant's bones now scattered and singed. With a pang of guilt, we gathered what we could of poor Magdalene's remains. A skull here, a few ribs there, scooping them back into what was left of the box. I murmured a contrite prayer. Lord Emperor, forgive us for this indignity. Guide the soul of this departed in the beyond, and grant these remains safe keep once more. It felt hollow after what we'd just survived, but it was all we could do. By the time we made it back to the road, night had fully fallen. We trudged homewards, bruised and splattered with mud and corpse crawler ichor. We reported the incident to the night watch sergeant at the gate. He listened with a stoic frown, taking notes. Corpse crawlers again. That's the third time this season, he muttered. Apparently others had encountered them recently too. He thanked us for dispatching one. A team would be sent in the morning to search for the wounded second crawler, though I doubted they'd find it. Those creatures have a knack for vanishing underground. When our shift finally ended and we staggered into the refectory for a late meal, other caretakers crowded around Tomas and me, eager to hear the tale of our encounter. Word travels fast on Tenebris. By then, everyone from the gravediggers to the choir monks knew we'd slain a corpse crawler. A few clapped us on the shoulders with congratulatory grins. Old Brevin, a grizzled digmaster, joked that we ought to carve little crawler silhouettes on our shovels like fighter aces, marking kills. I managed to chuckle at that, though in truth fatigue and the adrenaline crash were hitting hard. As we ate our thin broth and stale bread, the conversation turned to speculation. It was the third corpse crawler incident in a matter of weeks, more frequent than usual. Sister Oliamp, one of the visiting healers from the convent, murmured that she found it an ill omen. The Emperor sends his creatures to test us, she said over her cup of recaf. Where the carrion crawlers feast, death follows. A superstitious view, perhaps, but given her station, none openly disagreed. Another attendant, Lorien, mentioned something about the sky. That old crimson comet is supposed to return soon, mark my words, he said in a hushed tone. My gran told me when that red eye blazes in the heavens, it heralds calamity. A few scoffed. Lorien was known to be hyperbolic, but others nodded uneasily. Superstition or not, everyone knew the times were turbulent across the sector. Rumors of war and upheaval had been filtering in through Pilgrim talk and the rare news dispatch from off-world. An underlying tension had been slowly building, like the pressure in the air before a storm. Tomas caught my eye across the table. He didn't need to speak for me to read his expression. Something is coming. I gave a slight nod. We both felt it. Exhausted as I was, that night I lay in my bunk with uneasy thoughts swirling, of beasts stirring in graveyards, of unseen threats creeping closer, and of blood-red stars on the rise. That night I dreamt a nightmare that jolted me awake and remains etched in my mind. In it I was back in that foggy grave field. The corpse crawler's screech still echoed, but when I looked down into the open grave, it wasn't the beast that emerged. It was Magdalene Forthus, the very woman whose bones we had been moving. Her decayed eyes opened and fixed on me, and she let out a sorrowful moan. One by one, other nearby graves erupted like boiling mud. Skeletal hands and rot-swollen bodies clawed their way to the surface. In the dream, I stumbled back horrified as dozens of the dead encircled me. They were soldiers still riddled with shrapnel, children with ashen faces, elders crumbling to dust, a grotesque congregation. Their milky eyes regarded me with something like accusation. "Why have you disturbed us?" Magdalen's corpse gurgled, lips peeling back from brown teeth. I tried to stammer an apology, but no sound came. A chorus of whispering voices rose from the dead. "We cannot rest! We cannot rest!" over and over. Then, in unison, their heads snapped toward me, and they spoke as one in a dreadful, raspy voice not their own. "Join us. It's only a matter of time." I jolted awake just as their cold, bony fingers began to close around my arms, my own scream dying in my throat. It took a long moment in the darkness of my bunk to realize I was safe, that it was a dream. My skin was clammy, heart racing. I fumbled for the rosary beneath my pillow and whispered the litany of protection to banish the lingering dread. Only a dream, I assured myself. Just the aftermath of adrenaline and horror from that day. But I could not find sleep again that night. Whispers in the catacombs. In truth, signs of the coming dark times began to show even before St. Ophelia's shrine was violated. A couple of nights after the corpse crawler attack, I was doing a late patrol through the lower ossuary halls. The hour was near midnight, and a lantern was my only company. As I turned a corner by the columbarium of heroes, I noticed something odd. A side gate that should have been locked stood slightly ajar. I knew I had bolted it myself earlier in the evening. With a nervous swallow, I drew my utility knife and pushed the iron gate open. The hinges creaked into the silent hall beyond. I swept my lantern's beam and saw no one, only rows of skull-filled niches flickering in the dim light. The air was still, but my skin prickled. I could have sworn I heard soft footsteps receding just out of sight, yet when I mustered the courage to call out, no answer came. After a thorough, if tense, search, I found nothing and no one. I relocked the gate, heart pounding. In the morning, I reported the incident, but the senior clergy assumed I'd simply failed to latch it properly. I accepted the mild scolding, but inside I remained uneasy. I knew I hadn't left it open. Something was amiss in the grave city of Obsidia, and a chill like a premonition settled in my bones. Not long after, that feeling of foreboding proved true. We arrived one morning at the shrine of St. Ophelia, a minor chapel on the outskirts of Obsidia, to find the heavy oak door ajar and the sanctum inside in disarray. St. Ophelia's gilded sarcophagus had been cracked open. The reliquary urns were toppled, ashes spilled across the altar. Most disturbing of all, the saint's skull was gone. Her skeletal remains, interred here for centuries, had been disturbed and a piece removed. I remember standing there in that cold, dusty chapel, staring at the empty casket with a chill running through me. Theft of holy relics is one of the gravest crimes imaginable here. Who would dare? Tomas crossed himself and whispered, "What blasphemy is this?" We searched the chapel and found signs of forced entry, a pried lock, footprints in the dust. But something was off. Valuable offerings, candlesticks, jewel-encrusted icons were left untouched. Only bones were taken. It seemed the intruder cared only for the saint's remains, not riches. We reported immediately to Father Raldon, the priest overseeing that chapel. He was a thin, reedy man with perpetually downcast eyes. When he saw the state of the sanctum, his face went pale as parchment. He uttered a dozen, "Emperor preserve us," and hurried prayers. But I sensed an unease in him beyond the expected shock. His hands trembled not just with outrage, but fear. Father Raldon dispatched us to alert the city wardens while he secured the scene. As we left, I noticed him gingerly picking up something from the floor near the sarcophagus. It looked like a small shard of metal or stone. He slipped it into his robes quickly, perhaps assuming I hadn't seen. I filed that away in my mind. The wardens, our local enforcers, mostly lay brethren tasked with security, did a sweep of the chapel grounds. They found a few clues, scuff marks on a back window where someone might have entered, and strange symbols lightly etched on the inside of the door. I took a closer look at those markings. They were subtle, as if scratched by a knife's tip. Two overlapping triangles with a line through them, repeated in a pattern. It didn't resemble any script or holy symbol I knew, certainly not of the Imperial Creed. One of the wardens shrugged it off as meaningless graffiti by some deranged thief, but I wasn't so sure. News of the profanation spread quietly among the caretakers and clergy that day. We were all on edge. Relic theft is rare on Tenebris, and when it happens, it's typically the work of off-world smugglers looking to sell holy bones on the black market. The governor, Lord Geronius Pyre, had notoriously harsh measures against such crimes. In fact, rumor said he'd once executed a whole shuttle crew suspected of relic smuggling to make a point, so the audacity of someone striking a saint's shrine within Obsidia itself was alarming. Thomas was deeply disturbed. That evening, as we stacked candlesticks in the Grand Mausoleum's storage, he muttered, "I can't stop thinking about it. Saint Ophelia's skull, Emperor, the desecration. Who would do such a thing, Marcus? Could it be those corpse-crawler hunting parties? Or cultists?" The word hung in the air. Cultists. Neither of us wanted to consider it, but Tenebris had its share of whispers. Any world steeped in death breeds superstition and sometimes heresy. The majority of our folk are pious, emperor-fearing. Yet, I recalled dark jokes about the bone charlatans, rumored groups who held strange beliefs even within the ecclesiarchy's own ranks. The old caretaker, Garin, had once confided after a few drinks that some priests pray to things below, not above. "I don't know," I sighed in answer to Tomas. "It might just be a thief with an odd calling. Could even be someone thinking saints' bones will cure an ailing relative. We've heard of desperate acts like that." Tomas shook his head. "Stealing a saint's skull won't cure anything but earn you damnation." He paused, then added quietly, "If it is cultists, the thought chills me. To defile the Emperor's servant in death, to take what's sacred, that's beyond forgivable." I nodded somberly. Internally, I weighed whether to mention what I saw Father Ralden pocket. I decided to keep it to myself for now. Perhaps it was nothing, or something he meant to deliver to the authorities. Yet some instinct made me uneasy about the mild-mannered priest. In the following days, security was tightened, more patrols in the graveyards and vaults at night. We workers were given stricter curfews, no wandering the cemeteries off duty. The priests led public litanies for Saint Ophelia's forgiveness and the return of her relic. Outwardly, all was pious unity against an affront. But behind closed doors, gossip thrived. One brother whispered to another that bones were missing elsewhere too, an incident of a grave dug up in the pauper's field with the body gone, and another of a crypt broken into, though that one had nothing taken but the door left wide. These were kept quiet, but among ourselves we connected the dots. Something or someone was disturbing the dead beyond just the one shrine. I began to pay extra attention during my rounds. Late one night, as I made my way through the lower level of the Grand Ossuary, a warren of bone-lined tunnels where masses of common folk's remains are interred, I heard the faint scrape of movement ahead, where no living person should be at that hour. Heart thudding, I doused my lantern to a low glimmer and crept forward. The tunnels were lit by occasional electro-candles, casting long shadows. Rounding a corner, I caught sight of silhouettes down a side passage. Two figures, cloaked and hooded, carrying what looked like a heavy sack between them. I shrank back behind a pillar of stacked skulls, peeking out. The figures murmured to each other in hushed tones I couldn't fully catch. One voice was female, the other likely male, both speaking low Gothic with an odd cadence, perhaps off-world accents or trying to mask their voices. They set the sack down briefly, and I saw an object tumble out. A human arm bone. My stomach tightened. They were carrying human remains. A cold draft blew through the tunnel, stirring dust. I must have shifted involuntarily because the conversation stopped. One figure turned my way. I held my breath, pressing into the alcove's darkness. After a long moment, the voices resumed, a bit faster and more agitated. They hefted their grisly bundle and hurried on. I didn't dare follow directly. If they were armed or dangerous, I stood no chance alone. Instead, I attempted to shadow them from a distance, taking a parallel route I knew would intersect further ahead. Crawling through a narrow charnel crawl space, literally over piles of centuries-old bones. I moved as quietly as possible. My heart was pounding in my ears. Emerging into another hall, I glimpsed them descending a spiral stair that led down toward the catacombs beneath the ossuary. Those lower catacombs were ancient, largely sealed off except for authorized clergy. Alarm bells rang in my mind. They were going where they definitely weren't supposed to. I waited until I could no longer hear their steps, then followed. The old stone steps curved deep into the earth, lit only by sparse lumen globes. The air grew colder, damper. Here the walls were less orderly, the remnants of older burials and excavations. The Imperium had built atop the bones of older civilizations, perhaps. Some sections of the sub-catacombs predated the Great Crusade, or so the senior archivists said. At the bottom, I kept to the shadows behind pillars as the passage opened into a crypt chamber. I saw the two figures joining several others. In total, maybe half a dozen cloaked people gathered amid the tombs. They had lit a few candles, giving off just enough light for me to make out that they stood in a circle around a large stone plinth, an ancient sarcophagus that looked long unopened. They emptied the sack, dumping bones, some still with scraps of flesh. Thrown were those freshly deceased, onto the floor before the plinth. My pulse raced. This was a clandestine meeting, clearly up to no good. I strained to hear. One of the figures, a tall man with a commanding presence, spoke something in a language I didn't recognize at first, a guttural, clipped chant. Then he switched to Gothic. The Atramenta awakens. The first signs have appeared. The holy silence has been broken. We must be ready for his return. The convergence comes with the omen in the heavens. Atramenta? Convergence? Omen in heavens? My mind whirled. Was this some warp cult? The mention of return. Did they mean the Emperor? No, this felt wrong. Another chimed in. We have gathered the relics and remains as instructed. The essence of the devout dead will sanctify the way. That voice I recognized with a shock. It was Father Raldon. So he was part of this. I had to clamp a hand over my mouth to keep from gasping out loud. The woman's voice added, almost tremulous with excitement. Soon the sleepers beneath will heed the call. The blood comet approaches as it did millennia ago. The blood god's servants think it a sign for themselves, but we know it is a sign of the returning kings of old. We, the children of inheritance, shall greet them as faithful stewards. I felt as though ice water had replaced the blood in my veins. Blood god's servants? Returning kings? Children of inheritance? This was sounding worse by the second, a mix of heresy and possibly Xenos worship. And they mentioned the blood god, Khorne, one of Chaos's vile deities, in a dismissive way, suggesting perhaps a separate agenda, perhaps multiple cults or events coinciding. The tall leader raised his hands over the pile of bones. By the blood of martyrs and the bones of saints, we prepare this world for the undying masters who reigned before the Imperium. We tend their garden of graves in wait for their awakening. When the skies burn red, the ground shall give up its secrets." The group murmured in unison. "As was promised, so shall it be." I realized my hands were shaking fiercely. This was high heresy, revering beings other than the Emperor, speaking of undying masters and ancient reign. And the blood comet. I recalled something from childhood lore. The Crimson Comet, also called Keeler's Comet, that passes through the sector every few millennia. In fact, there had been talk among scholars that it was due to appear again soon. Some believed it heralded disaster or war. These cultists clearly had tied it into their prophecy. As I carefully shifted my weight, my boot scraped a small pebble which skittered across the floor. The sound was like a thunderclap in that tense silence. Immediately, the chant ceased. "Who goes there?" A voice barked sharply. My stomach dropped. I turned and bolted back toward the stair before even daring to look. Behind me, shouts echoed, and the beams of handheld luminators danced on the walls. Footsteps came pounding after me. I took the steps 2, 3 at a time, nearly tripping. Cloak-swathed figures were not far behind. I could hear their rapid breaths and curses. One yelled, "Stop! In the name of—" But he didn't finish, perhaps realizing the irony of invoking Imperial authority. They knew someone had spied on them. They would not let me get away if they could help it. Desperation fueled me. I plunged back into the ossuary tunnels, turning down a side corridor, an ossuary of the Founders, then crawling through a gap in a collapsed wall I'd used before as a shortcut. In the gloom, I scraped my elbows and knees, but adrenaline dulled the pain. I could hear at least one pursuer clambering after me, knocking bones aside. Bursting out into a main corridor, I slammed an iron gate behind me and slid the bolt latch. A second later, the gate rattled with force from the other side. A hooded face appeared between the bars, eyes wild. It was Ralden. His soft demeanor was gone, replaced with fury. "Open this gate, you scum!" he spat, thrusting an arm through. In his hand glinted a las pistol. Emperor knows where a simple priest got one. I backed away, hands raised instinctively. "Father Raldon, why? What are you doing?" It was a foolish thing to ask while he clearly intended to kill me, but I was in shock at seeing him like this. "You blind whelp! You doom us all with your meddling," he snarled, voice cracking. "This world belongs to its true masters, not to the corpse on Terra. We were preparing it for salvation, and you ruin everything!" He thrust the pistol wildly. I heard the cracking discharge of a last shot and dove behind a column as a lance of red light hissed through the air, scorching the stone. Ralden was actually shooting at me. Fear and disbelief warred within me. A priest of the Emperor trying to murder an acolyte. The heresy was deeper than I thought. The gate shuddered as more weight slammed it. Others had caught up to Ralden. They might break through in time, the old lock bending under their assaults. I scrambled to my feet and ran. "Alarm!" I shouted into the darkness as I ran blindly down another corridor. "Security! Intruders in the ossuary!" Perhaps I hoped a patrol might hear me, though at this hour few would be in these depths. My voice echoed, giving away my position too, but I figured any chance of help was worth the risk. I dashed up an incline that led toward one of the ossuary's side exits. Behind me, a faint voice cried, "Find him. He must not reach the surface." Their footsteps fanned out. They likely knew these tunnels nearly as well as I did. After all, some of them were clergy who worked here too. My lungs burned as I navigated the warren. I silently cursed the labyrinthine design that I usually appreciated for its solemn beauty. In that moment, I would have given anything for a straight path and open sky. At last, I spied the outline of the side postern door, a small servant's exit near the Cliff of Martyrs, a sheer wall where some ossuaries are built into the rock. I fumbled with the latch, praying it wasn't locked from outside. By grace, it opened, and I slipped out into the night. The cool air of the outdoors slapped my face. I was on a narrow ledge behind the ossuary complex, overlooking a slope down to the lower cemeteries. Above, the sky was cloudy with only a sliver of moon casting dim light. I knew I couldn't head back to my dorm or common areas. The cultists could intercept me there. So I did the only thing that came to mind. I made for Tomas's quarters. He stayed in a small caretaker's lodge near the east wall of the Grand Mausoleum. Keeping to shadows, I ran, skirting between mausoleums, my heart still hammering. I expected at any moment to feel a last bolt sear into my back. Thankfully, none came. Perhaps they lost me or decided to scatter and lay low, uncertain how much I overheard. I reached the lodge and frantically knocked the coded pattern we used, 3 quick raps, 1 slow, so he'd know it's me. A bleary-eyed Tomas cracked open the door moments later, dressed in a simple night robe, his hair tousled from sleep. "Marcus?" "Throne, what's wrong?" he whispered, seeing my distraught face. I pushed inside, shutting the door behind and leaning against it, chest heaving. "Tomas, I saw them. A cult under the ossuary. Father Raldon's one of them. They tried to kill me." I blurted it out in a rush, voice shaking. To his credit, Tomas didn't waste time doubting. The fear in my eyes must have been evidence enough. He put a steadying hand on my shoulder as I gulped air. "Easy. Emperor's breath. Marcus, start from the beginning. Tell me everything." I recounted what I had witnessed, the clandestine gathering, their words about ancient masters and the comet, Raldon shooting at me. Tomas listened, face growing more grave by the second. Under different circumstances, I think he would have struggled to accept that clergy he respected were betraying the faith. But having a friend nearly killed tends to focus the mind. "We have to report this immediately," he said when I finished, his voice urgent but hushed. "This is heresy of the worst kind. We need to go to the ecclesiarch of Obsidia or the Arbites, someone high up who isn't involved." I nodded, though I was less sure who we could trust. If Raldon and presumably others, did I see anyone else familiar? Perhaps I thought I recognized an archivist and one of the ossuary custodians were in on this. How far did it reach? "The canoness?" I suggested. Obsidia had a small convent of Adepta Sororitas, who maintained some of the major shrines. The canoness superior there, Sister Hildegard, was known as austere and incorruptible. If anyone would take swift action against heresy, it was the Sisters of Battle. "Yes, the canoness," Tomas agreed. "She won't tolerate this filth. And the mournful guard, the security. If we alert their captain, they can round up these deviants." It was a plan, though a perilous one. We had to move fast before the cultists covered their tracks or found us. We decided Tomas would go alert the mournful guard barracks, while I would try to reach the Sororitas convent in the next courtyard. Splitting up was risky, but we didn't want to stick together and risk both of us being caught at once. Thomas clasped my arm firmly before we parted, eyes determined. "Throne willing, we'll stamp this out by dawn, my friend." I managed a weak smile. Having an ally by my side gave me strength. "Be careful," I urged him. "They may have people in the guard, too. Remember the warning. It's the living we must watch." He gave a resolute nod and disappeared into the darkness toward the guardhouse. I turned and made for the convent of the Order of the Shroud, the sororitas assigned to Tenebris. It was on the far side of a cloister garden adjacent to the Grand Mausoleum. The night was deadly still, only my footfalls and ragged breath sounding as I trotted through rows of manicured yew trees and statues of imperial saints. Halfway through the garden, fate intervened, and not in a kind way. From somewhere behind me came a sharp crack, the unmistakable snap of a las pistol firing. A tree trunk near me exploded in a shower of bark. I ducked instinctively and broke into a sprint, zigzagging. "Over here!" a voice called. Not Tomas, but one of my pursuers. They had found me again. I dashed behind a stone angel statue as another bolt sizzled past. I could make out 2, maybe 3 shapes at the garden's edge. One clambered over the low wall, a burly figure with a hood thrown back, face half hidden by darkness. Possibly one of the graveyard wardens gone rogue? I realized with cold dread that I had left a trail. Droplets of blood from cuts I got crawling through bones, perhaps, or they had spread out and spotted me by chance. Either way, I was in their crosshairs again. Only 100 more paces to the convent doors, a stout, steel-bound set of doors emblazoned with a fleur-de-lis. If I could reach it and raise an alarm. I took off from behind the statue, sprinting full tilt. The cultist shouted, "Stop, apostate!" Apostate, the gall of them. 3 last shots burned through the air. One clipped my left arm with a searing flash of pain. I gritted my teeth, nearly stumbling, but forced myself onward. The wound was superficial, but it left a hot line of agony. Another few steps. I could see the torch braziers flanking the convent entrance. No sign of any sister on guard outside. They likely didn't expect trouble here at the holy precinct. My pursuer was closing in. I heard heavy boots just a few meters behind. With a desperate cry, I slammed into the convent doors, pounding with my fist on the metal. "Open up! In the Emperor's name, open the door!" I shouted at the top of my lungs. For a terrifying second, nothing happened. Then I heard a muffled voice from within and the scrape of a bolt. The door cracked open and I glimpsed the glaring face of a novice sister. In that same instant, a powerful hand grabbed the scruff of my work coat and yanked me backward. I was flung to the ground, landing hard on my back. Above me loomed the burly cultist, a big man in a groundskeeper's tunic of all things. I recognized him in a flash. Brother Corin, one of the ossuary custodians. He'd always been quiet and surly, but I never imagined he'd be a heretic. His face was twisted in rage, and a thin wound on his cheek trickled blood. Perhaps he'd cut himself on rubble chasing me. He raised a shovel, ironically the same tool of our trade now turned into a weapon, ready to bring it down on my skull. I threw up my arms in a vain attempt to shield myself. There was a deafening boom and a flash of light from the doorway. Brother Corin's chest erupted in red mist. He staggered, the shovel dropping from lifeless fingers, and collapsed beside me. Startled, I turned to see Sister Superior Althea standing at the convent threshold, bolt pistol in hand, a wisp of smoke rising from its barrel. Behind her, 2 other armored sisters now pushed past, fanning out with weapons raised, their eyes scanning for more threats. "Emperor's wrath be upon the impure," Althea said coldly, stepping over the fallen cultist and offering me a gauntleted hand. I grasped it, my whole body shaking with relief and shock. They dragged me inside swiftly and barred the door. I tried to explain in a rush. The cult, Tom's alerting the guard, the pursuit. Althea's face remained stony, but her eyes narrowed at the mention of a heretical congregation beneath the ossuary. She sent 1 novice to wake the canoness and another to carry word to the arbitess and guard immediately. "And fetch a medic for this man," she added, noting my bleeding arm. Safe within those hallowed walls, adrenaline gave way to trembling exhaustion. It truly hit me that I was alive, saved at the last instant by the Sisters of Battle. Poor Brother Corin lay dead outside. I whispered a quick prayer for the Emperor's mercy on his soul, though he likely deserved none. Within minutes, the convent was abuzz. The canoness herself, an imposing gray-haired woman with a power sword at her hip, took my statement in a quiet side chapel as a medici bandaged my arm. Tomas arrived too, escorted by 2 guardsmen. He had successfully convinced the guard captains something was very wrong. and they were already mobilizing. His face lit with relief to see me alive. We clasped hands, neither needing to speak in that moment. I told the canoness everything I'd seen and heard as clearly as I could manage. Her expression remained stern, but I could sense her simmering anger at the blasphemy committed on her watch. When I recounted the cult's mention of the blood god's servants using the comet as a sign, she exchanged a sharp glance with the guard captain. "The Crimson Comet," she murmured. "There have been astropathic warnings of increased warp activity in the subsector, possibly tied to its approach. If this cult knows something—" The guard captain, a scarred veteran named Holger, added grimly, "There are rumors out of the neighboring system of a chaos fleet on the move. Emperor forbid they set foot here, but if they do, and we have a conspiracy inside our walls." They quickly formed a plan. While the sisters and Arbites would investigate and purge the cult within the city, Canoness Hildegard practically quivered with righteous zeal at that prospect. Captain Holger would double the defenses and alert the planetary defense force, just in case these talk of the blood god's servants signified an imminent external threat, such as a warband of Khorne cultists, or worse. I was exhausted and reeling, but one thing stuck out to me in their strategizing. We might not just be dealing with one threat, but two entirely different nightmares colliding. One already in our midst, the cult of these children of inheritance who worshipped ancient masters, and one possibly on its way from the stars, chaos followers drawn by the comet omen. The cult themselves had spoken as if the chaos hordes were an entirely separate group with different aims. The canoness left a pair of sisters to guard Tomas and me, for our safety and perhaps to ensure we were truly just unwitting witnesses, which we were. Despite their reassurances, sleep was impossible for us that night. We sat in the convent hall, adrenaline gradually ebbing and shock setting in. Tomas looked at me, attempting a faint grin. When we said life here was quiet, we might have spoken too soon. I let out a breath of something like a laugh. "Remind me to never complain about boredom again." Then, more solemnly, "Thank you, Tomas. I wouldn't have made it without you rallying help." He shook his head. "And I wouldn't have known of any of this without your damnable curiosity and courage. Throne, Marcus, sneaking after cultists alone. You've got more guts than sense." There was admiration and scolding in equal measure. I shrugged wearily. I was just angry and curious and maybe foolish, but someone had to see what they were up to. Our nervous banter masked our deeper fear. In a few short hours, our whole understanding of our world was upended. Priests we trusted were traitors. An ancient evil, perhaps Xenos in nature, lurked beneath our feet, and an army of chaos might be en route to add to the nightmare. As dawn's first bleak light crept through stained glass windows, the immediate peace was shattered by the tolling of alarm bells in the city. The cult had been found out, and the hunt was on. At first light, the convent and Arbites moved decisively. Canoness Hildegard marshaled her battle sisters to scour the city for any remaining cultists. Arbites enforcement teams smashed into suspected safe houses and back rooms of chapels, dragging out shrieking minor priests who bore the cult's mark. A few running gunfights erupted in the outer graveyards as die-hard cult members resisted with stolen lasguns or hidden blades. Father Raldin himself was nowhere to be found. He had vanished into the winding catacombs after our encounter, and perhaps slipped away in the chaos. Still, dozens of his co-conspirators were captured or killed by noon. Incense choked the halls as sisters purified the desecrated shrines. I kept mostly out of the way, answering a few terse questions from a stern Arbites judge, and watching as the secret rot within our world was cut out with righteous fervor. Yet even as we cleansed our own house, a greater threat was looming. The astropaths and lookouts delivered dire news. A fleet translation signature had been detected at the system's edge. The skies above began to turn a bruised red by mid-morning, a sure sign to any versed in superstition that bloodshed was coming. The Crimson Comet itself was said to be burning toward our orbit. The timing could not have been worse. While we were still reeling from internal betrayal, an external enemy was closing in. The great bells of Obsidia began to toll an alarm that hadn't sounded in generations. Little did we know the horrors we had unearthed beneath, and the war descending from above would collide to make that day the darkest chapter of Tenebris's history. War comes to Tenebris. The warning came by midday. Vox reports from orbital observers, frantic and crackling with interference. A fleet of ships had translated from the warp at the edge of our system, and they bore the hateful sigils of chaos. The Blood God's servants, exactly as the cultists had foreseen, were on their way. Tenebris, our quiet world of tombs, was about to become a battlefield. In Obsidia, sirens began wailing a monotone alarm. The clergy and administrators moved swiftly to enact emergency protocols many never thought we'd actually use. Gates were sealed, defensive positions manned by the mournful guard and any able-bodied volunteers. Most of Obsidia's ordinary folk, the elderly priests, the archivists, the children of our few lay workers, were ushered into underground crypt shelters and sealed vaults for safety. Only a few hundred of us, those able to fight, remained on the walls and at the barricades. We few would have to hold, or the rest would be slaughtered where they hid. Our military were largely ceremonial guards and volunteers with old PDF lasguns, plus a handful of sororitas and arbites. We had no titanic war machines, no regiment of seasoned troops, just a scattering of faithful ready to die to protect this sacred world. The canoness, Hildegard, took personal command of the defense, donning her power armor and stationing herself at the city's main gate alongside the arbites captain and Captain Holger of the Guard. By midday, distant booms resounded. The enemy ships had engaged our orbital defenses, limited as they were. Our world was no fortress planet. At best, we had a few antiquated defense lasers and a small Navy picket force. From my vantage atop the mausoleum's outer balcony, I could see bright pinpricks flaring high in the atmosphere, debris or drop pods entering hard. Then came the contrails of incoming landing craft streaking through the red-tinged sky. The first wave was coming directly for Obsidia. I swallowed hard and clutched my borrowed weapon, just a simple lasgun pressed into my hands by a PDF sergeant. My injured arm throbbed under its bandage, but I could still aim. Not that I had much training beyond point and shoot. Thomas was positioned further down, helping an arbites squad cover a side approach. We exchanged a glance and a brave nod across the sandbag line. The landing craft screamed closer, multi-engined flyers shaped like predatory beasts. Flak fire from our few emplacements peppered the sky. One craft exploded in a blossom of flame, cheers going up from the line, but at least 4 more came through. They hit the ground outside the city walls with earth-shaking thuds. From each, a tide of madness poured forth. Even prepared, my blood ran cold. The attackers swarmed on foot toward our gates. Hordes of cultists in blood-red rags brandishing rifles and chain axes, interspersed with taller figures. Chaos Space Marines, their Baroque power armor painted in crimson and brass, marked with skulls and the bloodletter rune of Khorne. I saw one lift a roaring chainsword, leading a charge, and the sunlight caught on his horned helmet, beneath which a face mask shaped like a snarling demon leered. These were World Eaters, the infamous berserkers of Khorne. I had heard tales of them in hushed voices. Now they were brutally real and closing fast. "For the Emperor, hold the line!" roared Captain Holger somewhere to my right. Our defenses erupted in gunfire. Last bolts, autogun rounds, and a few heavier stubber shots sprayed out, cutting into the onrushing mass. Cultists fell in droves, but those behind climbed over the bodies, screaming praise to their dark god. As they charged, I could make out their frenzied cries, "Blood for the blood god," a terrifying slogan I'd only heard in cautionary tales, now screamed in reality. The first impacts shuddered the gate. The heretics had crude breaching charges. An explosion blew apart a section of plasteel and shattered the ancient warded skulls that adorned it. Through the smoke they came, and battle was truly met. What followed was a bloody, deafening melee that seemed to stretch on for an eternity. The cultists who made it past the rubble crashed into our lines and were met with furious resistance. I fired my last gun from behind a fallen pillar, managing to drop one frothing madman who vaulted over the barricade. He fell, a smoking hole through his chest, but another clambered after him, swinging a rusted machete. A nearby Arby-Tess put a shotgun blast into that one, nearly cutting him in half. To my left, a Cornat Marine barreled through a group of our militia, scattering bodies like ragdolls. Before he could butcher more, 3 Sororitas sisters engaged him, power swords flashing against his roaring chain axe. I lost sight of that duel as I ducked to avoid a spray of return fire from outside. Explosions rocked the square, possibly our own frag grenades or enemy ordnance. A haze of dust and smoke choked the air, making it hard to see more than a dozen paces. The smell of blood became pungent. I remember adrenaline and terror blanking out higher thought. I found myself next to Brother Sergeant Verlo, one of the senior gravediggers who had taken up arms. He was firing an old bolter pistol with shaky hands, cursing under his breath. We huddled behind an overturned tomb cart as bullets pinged off the mausoleum's stone steps. Just as he turned to say something to me, a bolt round whizzed past my ear and struck Brother Verlo square in the chest. The explosion blew out his back in a mist of gore. Without a sound, he toppled over, dead before he hit the ground. I flinched as his blood splattered my arms. There was no time to react beyond instinct. I dropped flat, heart hammering. "Emperor, receive your soul," I managed to stutter under my breath, choking on shock, then forced myself to focus. Verlo's pistol lay in the dirt, still clutched in his severed hand. I tore my eyes away and pressed on with the fight, fighting the urge to panic. Amid the chaos, an inhuman howl cut through, a sound that froze my soul. From the smoke emerged a creature out of nightmare, a bloodletter of Khorne, a lesser demon but horrific to behold. Tall, gaunt, crimson-skinned, with a snarling canine visage and a crown of horns. It wielded a blade that seemed to drip with sizzling blood. It leapt upon a cluster of defenders to my right, and with one sweep of its hellblade, decapitated 2 of them. A sister superior thrust her chainsword at it, carving a chunk from its torso, but the demon barely flinched and backhanded her into a wall with a crack of ceramite. Her body slumped, unmoving. As the demon turned its burning yellow eyes toward me, I felt all courage drain. How could a mere man stand against that? I fumbled to reload my last gun, knowing it was probably futile. Suddenly, a burst of bolter fire pounded into the side of the bloodletter. Chunks of demonic flesh exploded into ichor. The beast snarled in rage just as a figure charged through the dust. Not a sister, but an Astar-Tess in power armor of somber gray-blue, marked with a flayed skull device, heraldry of the Excoriator's chapter, on his pauldron. He crashed into the demon with a thunderous force, chainsword revving. The duel was swift and brutal. Within moments, the Space Marine beheaded the Hellspawn, banishing it back to whatever nightmare it came from. I recognized the livery from old war accounts. An excoriator. Emperor be praised. The Adeptus Astartes had arrived. Indeed, through the swirling smoke, I now glimpsed more giant armored shapes laying into the enemy. Bolters barked in disciplined volleys. One Marine hefted a heavy flamer, bathing a knot of cultists in purifying fire. The sight bolstered our faltering hearts. Reinforcements. The Emperor had not left us forsaken after all. With the Space Marines' sudden appearance on the battlefield, our line rallied. The Canoness, wounded but unbowed, raised her power sword high and led a push to retake the shattered gate. I saw her plunge the blade through a Chaos worshipper and pistol whip another, all the while reciting prayers of absolution. The enemy, fanatic as they were, now faced the full wrath of both Sororitas and Astartes. Their initial momentum flagged. Many cultists, already cut down in droves, began to waver. The traitor Marines were far tougher, each one a savage whirlwind of gore, but even they began to be driven back by the combined might arrayed against them. My part in that grand melee was small and frankly ignoble. I mostly cowered in cover, taking potshots when opportunity allowed, and helped drag a wounded guardsman behind a statue for cover. He was moaning, missing a leg. I used a bit of torn cloak to tourniquet him as best I could, trying not to retch at the sight. Amid the chaos, I briefly locked eyes with one of the Chaos Space Marines, a giant with a crest of bloody hair on his helmet. He bellowed something unintelligible and fired his bolt pistol in my direction. The round screamed past, exploding a chunk of masonry near my head. Before he could adjust aim, an Arbites riot gun blasted him from the flank, distracting him. He charged toward that new threat, leaving me shaking but alive. Just as it seemed we might gain the upper hand, a new sound rolled over the battlefield, a deep, sonorous horn blast that rattled the very stones. Both friend and foe paused, almost involuntarily. From beyond the gate, in the bloody fields outside, shapes moved. Large shapes. Through the settling smoke, I saw what looked like an armored behemoth, a chaos dreadnought or walker of some kind, stomping toward the city. Its hull was daubed with crimson runes, and a giant brass icon of corn jutted from its carapace. With a mechanical howl, it leveled twin cannons and opened fire. Shells hammered into the front of the grand mausoleum, obliterating statues and blasting a crater in the steps. Several defenders were there 1 second and simply gone the next, replaced by blood and dust. Even the Marines scrambled for cover from that onslaught. The dreadnought lumbered closer, firing indiscriminately and swatting aside rubble. This engine of destruction threatened to punch straight into obsidia and break our hard-fought stand. The excoriators, however, were not without their own salvation. With a streak of contrails, a fresh drop yard screamed down from the sky, impacting just behind our lines in the plaza. Its doors blew open with a hiss of pressure, and out strode Terminators. Enormous Astartes clad in tactical dreadnought armor, bearing heavy weapons. One hefted a Cyclone missile launcher. They wasted no time. Guided by a spotter's flare from a sister, 2 crack missiles whooshed out, slamming squarely into the Chaos Walker. The first blew off an arm, the second punched into its torso and detonated. The dreadnought went up in a fireball, its horn dying in a discordant warble. In the brief lull that followed that massive explosion, I dared to peek out from cover and survey what remained of the plaza. The devout beauty that once was Obsidia's heart lay in ruin. The statue of Saint Ivdine that had stood at the gate was now toppled, its head and arms broken off. Ironically, those marble fragments had crushed a number of cultists when they fell. The ornate fountain of the Emperor's mercy in the square center was shattered, its basin cracked and dry except for a mix of spilled water and blood. The grand archway leading to the memorial gardens had caved in, its pillars reduced to rubble. All around, mausoleum facades were pockmarked with bullet holes and scorched by flamers. What had been a place of reverence now looked like a vision of hell. It was hard to reconcile that this was the same plaza where, mere days ago, I had gently lit candles and swept fallen leaves from the steps. My momentary respite was shattered by a new sound that reached my ears: gunshots and a scream from within the grand mausoleum behind our lines. My heart lurched. The mausoleum interior was supposed to be secure, a sanctuary where the wounded were being taken and non-combatants sheltered. If fighting had broken out inside, it meant the enemy had found a way in. Without thinking, I scrambled up and sprinted toward the ornate doors of the mausoleum, half expecting to be cut down from behind as I broke cover. The battle outside was still raging, but I was driven by a surge of protective instinct for that sacred place. As I dashed through the great archway, the scene inside made me skid to a halt. The vast nave, lit by flickering candlelight and the haze of incense, had been violated. A group of 4 cultists had forced their way in through a side entrance. Later, I learned they'd climbed into a high window that had shattered. They were now in the process of wreaking havoc among the statues and pews. One had overturned a reliquary stand, smashing a glass case that held the finger bones of an ancient saint. Another was spraying profanity in blood across a pillar, using a severed human hand dipped in gore as a paintbrush. A truly sickening sight. A third cultist had cornered one of our clergy, a young deacon, and had a knife to the terrified man's throat. The last was exchanging gunfire with an Arbitesi officer near the transept, using a marble tomb as cover. For a heartbeat, I froze just inside the doorway, taking in this profanation of our holiest space. Then something inside me, a mix of rage and duty, ignited. I was unarmed. I had dropped my spent lasgun outside, but on a nearby pedestal lay a heavy brass candelabra that had fallen in the chaos. I snatched it up, its weight reassuring in my hands like an improvised mace. The cultist with the knife was closest, backing the deacon up against the plinth of a statue. The deacon's eyes met mine across the dim hall, pleading and petrified. I realized if I didn't act, he would be murdered before my eyes. I crept forward along the shadow of a column, gripping the candelabra so tightly my knuckles ached. My mouth was dry, but I began silently reciting the Emperor's creed under my breath to steady myself. Fear not the darkness, for the Emperor is my light. Step by step, I closed the distance. The cultist was hissing vile words to the deacon, something about offering his guts to the blood god. He was so intent on his prey he didn't hear me approach from behind. When I was just a pace away, I held my breath and swung with every ounce of strength I had. The candelabra connected with the side of the cultist's skull with a crunch. The man crumpled like a sack of flour, collapsing at the deacon's feet without a sound. I blinked, stunned at how immediately and decisively he went down. I had never struck someone like that before. My hands trembled as I lifted the makeshift weapon again, half expecting him to get up. He didn't. The deacon, shaking and suddenly freed, managed a whimper of relief and scrambled away on all fours. That left the other 3 intruders. The one defacing the pillar noticed me now and let out a snarl of rage. "You'll pay for that, lackey!" he spat, flinging aside the severed hand and drawing a stubby revolver from his belt. I had no cover in the open aisle. Instinctively, I dove behind a stone funerary urn as his revolver barked. A slug whined off the floor tiles, showering me with chips of marble. I crouched, heart hammering. I didn't fancy my chances in a shootout armed with only a blunt object. Fortune, or the Emperor's grace, was on my side. Before the cultist could fire again, a bolt round exploded through his chest from the side. The Arbites officer, wounded but alive, had flanked him during our brief confrontation and put a round in his torso. The cultist collapsed in a heap, blood pooling around the blasphemous symbols he'd painted. The remaining two heretics, seeing two of their number dead, began to falter. The one trading shots by the transept shouted, "Retreat! These fools aren't worth it! Fall back!" He and the other started running toward the side corridor they'd entered from. Fury flared in me. I wasn't about to let them desecrate and run. I gave chase, with the Arbitess limping after me. We caught up at the base of a spiral stair. The slower cultist, an older brute with scars, wheeled around to ward us off, swinging a chain blade. I ducked under the wild swing and, without hesitation, jammed the prongs of my candelabra straight into his face. He howled as his nose shattered and eyes burst under the force. I barreled into him with all my weight, knocking him over the balustrade. He fell with a sickening thud to the marble floor below, not moving. The last cultist disappeared through a broken stained glass window, dropping to the ground outside and fleeing toward the cemetery. I leaned out the window and saw him run a short distance before a figure in black power armor, a space marine, intercepted him with a swift chainsword strike. The cultist's head flew from his shoulders, and his body toppled in the red-tinged dust. The immediate threat inside the mausoleum was over. I slumped against the wall, gasping for breath. My entire body was trembling as the adrenaline caught up to me. In the span of minutes, I had struck down two men and seen others brutally dispatched. The Arbitess officer approached, clutching a bleeding wound in his side. Thank you," he managed, grimacing. "You saved us in here." I simply nodded, not trusting my voice. As I looked around at the carnage, the shattered relics, the once holy floor now smeared with blood and char, it hit me in a wave. Rage at the defilement, sorrow for the damage done, and an odd, grim satisfaction that we had protected this sanctum. There was no time to dwell, however. Outside, the war raged on, and new cries were sounding, some triumphant, some desperate. I offered a hand to the deacon I'd saved, who was sobbing quietly in shock, and gently guided him to take cover behind the altar, where a few of the injured huddled. "Stay here. It's all right now," I whispered, though I wasn't sure it truly was. Then, picking up a discarded lasgun from one of the fallen cultists, I rushed back out into the ash-choked daylight, back into the fray, where the final act of the battle for Tenebris was reaching its bloody crescendo. When I burst back onto the steps, I beheld the Chaos War Leader, a massive champion in Baroque armor, locked in single combat with the Space Marine captain amidst a ring of fallen onlookers. Their duel was like something out of the legends, the clashing of titans that would decide the fate of our world. The Chaos Champion, however, was too deep in bloodlust to flee. Enraged by the interference of Space Marines and now the setback of his failed intrusion, he roared and swung his warp axe at the nearest legionnaire that had manifested behind him. The damned Astartes caught the axe in a gauntleted hand. I swear by Terra he caught the blade mid-swing, and green flames surged from his grip, engulfing the weapon. The champion staggered, momentarily off balance from this impossible act. That gave the Excoriator's captain the opening he needed. With a mighty thrust, he rammed his power sword through the champion's chest. The Chaos Leader gurgled something unintelligible as the Loyalist withdrew the blade and delivered a final decapitating strike. The champion's head fell among shattered tombstones, and his body collapsed in a heap of Baroque armor. A cheer went up, ragged, triumphant, from the surviving defenders. The remaining traitor, Astartes, attempted a fighting retreat, unwilling to face these new ghostly adversaries. We did not yet realize who or what the mysterious black-armored figures truly were. The Legion of the Damned began to vanish as suddenly as they'd arrived, content that the immediate threat had been neutralized. In the stunned lull that followed, I heard an Arbitess's trooper cough out a strained laugh. "Emperor's bones," he said aloud, voice shaking. "Next time I whine about a quiet post, remind me of today. We had ghosts fighting demons on our side." A ripple of half-hysterical chuckles spread among nearby survivors. Even in our shock, that bit of humor was like a release valve on a pressure cooker. We were alive to laugh, however grimly, and that mattered. With the chaos forces broken, isolated skirmishes continued around the city edges, but organized enemy presence had been smashed. As the dust settled and our ears rang in the sudden comparative quiet, I found myself slumped against a fragment of wall, exhaustion weighing me down. The once beautiful plaza was a ruin of craters and ash. Bodies of friend and foe littered the ground, twisted in death. Fires crackled here and there, and the stench of burnt flesh and promethium hung heavy. The grand mausoleum's facade was shattered, one of its great doors hanging from a single hinge. Stained glass windows depicting the saints were blown out, only shards remained. The dead would need tending, the wounded treatment. As the adrenaline haze lifted, a wave of sorrow and horror at the carnage set in. But amidst that, there was also a profound sense of victory, Pyrrhic though it might be. Yet one threat still lingered on my mind even as we began the grim tasks after the battle. The Necrons. The Legion of the Damned had aided us against the Chaos Horde, but the Xenos' presence beneath our feet had been stirred and not fully dealt with. I overheard the Excoriator's captain and canoness discussing it with grave tones. The consensus, the catacombs where the Metal Ones rose, would be sealed with demolition charges, at least temporarily. An astropathic call had already been sent to request aid from the Ordo Xenos. The Inquisition would likely dispatch a team to investigate the extent of the tomb beneath Tenebris. For the moment, however, the Necrons seemed to have receded. Perhaps only a few had awakened before the tomb closed again. We did not see more emerging after the battle's end, and tech adepts from the Excoriators began to auspex scan the area for unusual energy signatures, taking over where we commoners could not contribute. As the sun dipped low on the horizon, casting long shadows over the devastated cemetery fields, the immediate crisis was past. Tenebris had survived the onslaught of the Chaos Warband. Many paid with their lives to ensure it. And we had received aid from mysterious quarters, both mortal and possibly divine. I will never forget standing amidst those broken graves, my ears still ringing, as daylight faded and a heavy stillness fell. In that silence, broken only by distant cries of the injured and the crackle of fires, I felt the weight of the day fully. We had won, yes, but what a costly victory on this world of the dead. And the war beneath, the ancient horror, still lurked, waiting for its time. I shivered despite the warmth of the fires. We were alive for now. But I knew with grim certainty that on Tenebris, the dead never truly rest, and neither do the dangers. Aftermath and ashes. In the days that followed, Tenebris slowly began to reckon with what had transpired. A stillness hung in the air over Obsidia, not the peaceful silence we once knew, but a heavy, stunned quiet born of trauma. The once orderly rows of mausoleums and graves were marred by craters and debris. Rubble lay where shrines had stood. Blood stained the marble steps of the grand mausoleum, mingling with wax from melted prayer candles and shattered glass from holy windows. Thomas and I, along with the other surviving caretakers, turned to the grisly work of collecting the fallen. Ironically, our duties as gravekeepers now expanded exponentially. We worked dawn to dusk, piling the corpses of cultists and traitor Astar Tess onto pyres, no burial for them, only purifying flame. Meanwhile, the bodies of our own brave defenders and civilians were carefully gathered for proper interment. The grand mausoleum's lower halls became a temporary mortuary lined with the shrouded forms of those who gave their lives. I choked up more than once as I recognized familiar faces among the dead. Brother Verlo, who joked with me each morning over recaf, Sister Althea, who saved my life with her bolt pistol. Even Father Raldon's crumpled form was dragged out from the catacombs, his countenance twisted in the agony of his final moments. The traitor priest would receive no honors. His body was quietly incinerated with the rest of the heretics. Amidst this sorrow, there were moments of solace. At least some of us still lived. Garen's old words, "It's the living you must watch," played in my mind. We had watched the living, uncovered their betrayal, and ultimately prevailed. Garen himself did not live to see this day. He'd passed some years ago, now resting in the very graveyard he tended. But I imagined his spirit looking on, nodding grimly at how prophetic his warning had been. The cult of the Children of Inheritance was thoroughly unmasked and destroyed. Those cultists who survived the battle were interrogated by the Arbites and inquisitorial agents who arrived some days later. The Inquisitor, a severe woman named Antonia Grice, oversaw the purge of any remaining heresy. She commended Tomas and me for our bravery in exposing the cult, though her cold, probing eyes made it clear that had we shown any sign of corruption, we'd have been ashes on the spot. For our service, she said, we would be granted the Emperor's blessing and perhaps consideration for formal service in the Ministorum or Inquisition one day. I politely declined anything beyond a simple commendation. After all that happened, I felt my place was still here, doing what I knew, caring for the dead. I myself was summoned for a formal debrief by Inquisitor Grice 2 days after the battle. It was the most nerve-wracking conversation of my life. We sat in the gutted shell of the Administratum office, the only quiet place available, and she fixed me with an unblinking stare as I recounted every detail of the cult's meeting and the Necron emergence. Her face revealed nothing, but her questions were razor-sharp. Describe the symbol you saw on the door. Did the cultists mention any specific names? How many Necron constructs did you witness active? Did you at any point come into physical contact with Xenos technology? I answered as honestly as I could, hands sweating despite the evening chill. Behind Grice stood 2 black-armored stormtroopers and a figure in power armor, one of the Death Watch Space Marines dispatched to assess the tomb. Talk about an intimidating audience. When I confessed how terrified I was during those events, a ghost of a smile crossed the Inquisitor's lips. "Fear is healthy in moderation," she said coolly. "It means your instincts are functioning. See that it does not stop you from doing your duty." In the end, she cleared me of any taint and even offered a terse commendation for my actions. But before dismissing me, she issued a warning. I was not to speak of the Necron presence openly to anyone without inquisitorial clearance. "The Imperium," she said, "has enough nightmares to contend with. No need to spread another among the populace." I was only too happy to agree. One small grace. In the aftermath of the cult's purge, we recovered many of the sacred relics they had stolen. Saint Ophelia's skull was found intact in a satchel of pilfered bones hidden in the catacombs. After rigorous purification rites, her remains were restored to her shrine. I was present when the ecclesiarchs reconsecrated her sarcophagus, sealing it with fresh wards of purity. The chapel was rededicated in a somber ceremony, erasing the stain of her defilement with prayers and incense. The bells rang out in that ruined chapel once more, a triumphant peal declaring that the saint's rest was again inviolate. In the weeks following, as I recovered and pored over historical archives, a pastime to distract myself from grim memories, I discovered our ordeal was not entirely without precedent. I stumbled upon a fragment in the ecclesiarchal chronicles of Segmentum Obscurus, describing a similar miracle on another cemetery world long ago. It recounted how on Syrtis Minor, a cemetery planet of great renown, a vast chaos warband known as the Holocaust Blood Crusade descended during the time of the Keeler Comet. The defenders there, too, were outnumbered and on the brink of annihilation when mysterious fire-clad space marines, clearly the Legion of the Damned by description, appeared and turned the tide. The records were fragmentary. The scribes attributed it to an intervention of the Emperor's angels, but reading them sent shivers down my spine. To think that I had lived through a near echo of that hallowed event was astonishing. It seems the Emperor watches over his resting worlds closely, and when the need is dire, he is not above sending revenant aid to ensure the sanctity of the dead. This realization gave me great comfort. Our story, Tenebris's story, was now part of a larger tapestry of miracles and horrors that define the Imperium. Perhaps one day our battle, the miracle of Tenebris, as some have started calling it, will offer hope to others in their darkest moments, just as the tale of Syrtis Minor quietly bolstered my faith when I needed it. For all the evil they wrought, the cultists had been right about one thing. Tenebris truly did harbor an ancient secret beneath its soil. In a way, we were tending to the resting place of ageless, inhuman beings all this time, blind to that reality. The realization made me shudder. How many generations of caretakers before me had tended these catacombs, never suspecting that some of the silent crypts were not built by human hands at all? Perhaps it was a mercy that knowledge of this tomb world within our world had been lost to history. It allowed us to do our duty without paralyzing fear. Now that the truth is known, every descent into the lower vaults is fraught with uncertainty. We light extra incense and recite twice the usual prayers when we must venture below, and the area around the collapsed Necron catacombs remains sealed and under armed guard. Our burden as custodians has only grown heavier, knowing what lurks in the depths. Yet I take a grim comfort that, at least for now, those ancient horrors have been forced back into sleep. We will be watchful. We will be ready as humble gravekeepers can be should they stir again. In the aftermath, once immediate crises were tended, the governor, Lord Pyre, eventually made a public address, his frail, corpse-like form appearing via servo-skull projectors, since he rarely leaves his mausoleum palace. He declared a period of mourning and praised the faith and courage of Tenebris's defenders. He glossed over the fact that traitors had lurked among our own clergy. Perhaps that was a truth too dangerous to fully speak. Instead, he cast the invasion as a great trial sent by the Emperor to test our faith. And by his grace, the governor's quavering voice echoed, we endured. From the ashes of the fallen, our world is reborn in devotion. Reborn might be too strong a word. There was so much to rebuild. The ecclesiarchy immediately dispatched architects and artisans from off-world to help restore damaged sanctuaries. Work crews from our populace, though diminished, labored to repair the city walls and cleanse the defiled grounds. The catacombs that had been breached were carefully resealed with adamantium and hexagrammic wards, courtesy of the Ordo Xenos. They were not taking chances with the Necron tomb below. Rumor had it that demolition charges collapsed entire tunnel networks to entomb whatever still lurked in the depths. Inquisitor Grice and a cadre of Death Watch space marines ventured briefly into the opened tomb entrance a week later, only to return and declare the site too dangerous for any civilian to approach again. All we know is that thereafter, no further metallic undead have crawled out from beneath. Whether the threat was truly neutralized or merely contained, none can say for sure. On a world of graves, perhaps some things are best left buried. The excoriator's space marines departed quietly after assisting with immediate defense arrangements. Before they left, their captain personally thanked the surviving members of the local defense, myself included, an honor so immense I could barely stammer a reply. He also asked the canoness to construct a small memorial for his fallen battle brothers to be kept here on Tenebris. "This world's soil has drunk the blood of many heroes," he said. "It will remember the Astar test, too." And so a new section in the cemetery was consecrated for those space marines who died protecting our graves. The irony isn't lost on me. Warriors who came to save a cemetery world, now themselves part of it. Within a week after the battle, a planet-wide requiem was held for the fallen. Every church bell on Tenebris tolled for hours, and an endless litany of names echoed through the mausoleum halls. It was said to be the largest funeral observance in our world's long history. We caretakers dug graves from dawn till dusk in the days leading up, ensuring every guardsman and cleric had a proper plot or vault. The Grand Mausoleum hosted a ceremony of remembrance. Even Lord Pyre's voice, crackling via servo-skull projectors, joined in the final prayers for the souls of the departed. By tradition, the presiding ecclesiarch intoned the litany of the departed, and we all joined in response. "O Emperor, shepherd of souls, receive these, thy servants, into thy light. Though they perish, let not their memory die. Though they walk in darkness, let thy beacon guide them home. In life they served thee faithfully. In death may they sit at thy side." Those words, repeated by thousands of voices, rang through the sepulchral air with heart-wrenching force. Canoness Hildegard, our commander in the battle, did not live to see the peace she had won. She finally succumbed to her wounds 2 days after the victory, passing away in the convent's infirmary with a prayer on her lips. The ecclesiarchy has already begun the process of beatification for her. Many call her a martyr and a saint who saved Tenebris. On the very night she died, spontaneous candlelight vigils broke out across the city. People left wreaths of bone-white flowers at the gates of the convent in her honor. Though sorrowful, her death only redoubled the faithful's resolve. We now had a local saint to watch over this cemetery world. As for me, I recovered from my wounds and resumed my duties. Someone has to catalog the names of the dead, ensure they are laid to rest with rites, and maintain this hallowed ground going forward. In fact, there are more graves to tend than ever. Fresh mounds of earth and new tomb markers dot the landscape, each one a story of valor or tragedy from the battle. A year has passed since that harrowing night. Tenebris still bears scars, but also new sources of strength. The grand mausoleum's shattered stained glass windows have been restored, one of them now depicting a scene of black-armored angels descending amid fire, a tribute to the Legion of the Damned's intervention. The faithful come from across the sector to see it and to hear our clergy recount how a handful of caretakers, sisters, and soldiers stood against the darkness and prevailed. We have become something of a pilgrimage site in our own right, a place not only to bury the dead, but to witness the triumph of faith over heresy. Each year, on the anniversary of the battle, we hold a solemn vigil at dusk. The names of all who fell, defenders and even civilians, are read aloud by the monks. We light lanterns along the pathways of the cemetery, thousands of little lights flickering in the gloom to symbolize the souls who now rest. The new canoness, Sister Superior Mariella succeeded Sainted Hildegard, leads us in the hymn of the righteous, and for a time the whole city of Obsidia joins in one voice that echoes among the tombstones. It is a sound both mournful and uplifting. Many weep openly, myself included, remembering those we lost. Thomas, Sister Althea, Brother Verlo, and so many others. But our tears are not only of grief, they are of pride too. Tenebris stood and stands still. The Emperor tested us in fire, and we did not break. Life continues here, changed yet fundamentally the same. I still wake before dawn to dust off the high altar and feed the crows that roost atop the columbarium, creatures that have grown fat and bold on battle's aftermath. I still accompany funeral processions and offer words of comfort to the bereaved. There are more fresh graves to tend now than I would like, but in time grass will grow over the mounds and they will become part of the landscape of memory, just as all others. In time, peace, however relative, settles over the tombs again. Birds sing in the cypress trees, and children of the recovered refugees leave little hand-picked bouquets for dead heroes they never met. Life and death, death and life, entwined in an endless cycle as it has always been on our world, and I remain a part of that cycle, a servant of this cemetery world, a humble storyteller and watchman of the silent legions who fell in humanity's name. I often walk the rebuilt walls at night, looking out over the moonlit grave fields. Where once I might have felt only dread, I now feel a solemn companionship. Beneath those countless headstones lie the Imperium's sons and daughters, my charges, my silent congregation. I speak to them sometimes in the quiet hours, updating them on how we carry on. I tell them their sacrifice was not in vain. I assure them they're remembered. Perhaps that's madness, or perhaps it's a small kindness in an uncaring galaxy. Either way, it gives me peace. They say the dead rest quietly. They haven't been to Tenebris. Here, on this haunted soil, the dead whisper their lessons to the living, and the living keep eternal vigil over the dead. That is life on a cemetery world. My life. A life among the never truly silent, never truly gone. And I wouldn't have it any other way. They say the dead rest quietly. They've never been to my world.